The purpose of the federal government is, in Thomas Jefferson's words, to protect people from a tyranny. And in fact, he said, where the people fear government, there is tyranny, but where government fears the people, there is liberty. And so the Declaration of Independence gives us those unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property or happiness. And so we need to keep that in mind, that our government's role is limited and defined. The role of the government in creating jobs should be to get out of the way of the private sector and allow investment to flourish and to provide prosperity for more jobs for Americans. Part of the problem is that in our nation we've been highly regulated. We can't even compete now with foreign nations that are running over our economy by undercutting our economy. We're losing jobs to these foreign nations. And so we have to cut back on those regulations. The Frank-Dodd Act, or Dodd-Frank, depending on where you're from, is one that is very, very egregious to investment. There are people who can't get mortgage loans, and they have assets that they can't even make liquid. And so that's something that we would have to repeal if we're going to really create prosperity in our private sector. There's an amendment that, if it passes to the Dodd-Frank Act, is going to be very egregious to 57% of Americans who would be required to put 20% down on a mortgage, and they can't afford that. And that is the basic of our private property principles, that we can have that American dream and own property and a house. Well, right now, 1% of our population, the wealthy, are covering 40% of the taxes. And that's not fair when you consider that 46% of the population isn't paying any taxes. I'm among the 53%. I pay taxes. We have to come up with a fair plan, and it has to be simple. There have been many different proposals discussed during the 2012 presidential debates. I think it's been a healthy discussion. I would like to see a simpler form of tax where the states can contribute to their allotment to the federal government, and it needs to be fair and flat. I have a solid, trusted record on what we ought to be doing with education in our country, and I agree with Ronald Reagan, and I hope we'll be able to fulfill his promise to dismantle the Department of Education, because one size fits all doesn't work, and we need to bring that local education policy to the parents and the teachers and help them make the right decisions and have good choices for curriculum for their children. Not only that, I've been following this for a long time. I also agree with Ronald Reagan when he withdrew the United States from UNESCO, which is the UN Education, Science, and Culture Organization. He called it un-American. And then President Bush II also got us back in 2003. He sent Secretary Rod Page to speak to UNESCO, and he thanked the UN for providing the framework for No Child Left Behind, which almost nobody likes. So there's a lot of influence that comes from that level as well. I've been there. I understand that. I am the candidate in this race that knows that we have to dismantle the Department of Education and any other agency, in fact, that is duplicated at the federal level, and that we can do better and more efficiently at the state level. According to Social Security Administration reports, about 50,000 children in Utah have had their Social Security numbers stolen. The fact is, an illegal alien cannot be working in the United States unless they are using some kind of Social Security number. They are fraudulently being used. If Americans did the same thing, we would be imprisoned. We've got to hold illegal aliens to the same standard to the rest of our citizens, or we defeat the purpose of the rule of law. Now, let me also state that we are a very compassionate nation when it comes to immigration. We allow about 1 million legal immigrants to come into this country every year. But on the other end of the border, we only have about 200,000 jobs that are available. And another point I'm very concerned about is I've spoken to the Drug Enforcement Administration here in Utah, and they have told me that enforcement is the only way to go, and that the Mexican drug cartels are as entrenched here in Utah as they are along our borders. That is very serious. We owe it to our children and our communities to keep this state safe. I have a trusted record in this. I have worked vigilantly with many good people in this state to make sure that our laws are taking care of the loopholes so that we will not have any form of backroom amnesty. Well, the first thing we have to do is drill here, drill now. The western United States has vast resources that it can't even access. Let's talk about Utah. Up to 65% of our resources are tied up. And Salazar has just come here, and now there's a 20-year moratorium on uranium. We have the resources. If we could access them, we could have great prosperity, more jobs in the state, and the cost of our energy would be much lower. Now, on the federal level, we have to dismantle the Department of Energy. That's duplicated at the state level. And we have to also phase out the EPA. There are 4 laws that need to go along with it. The Endangered Species Act, the Wilderness Act, the Lacey Act, and the Antiquities Act. Those are all keeping us from having great prosperity and efficient energy access in this country. The one that comes to my mind first and foremost is that of radical Islamist jihad. And I say that because you can go back in history of this nation, the founders confronted this same challenge. After they were out of the protection of Britain on the seas, and they were trying to trade with Europe and in the Middle East, they called the Barbary pirates, is what they were called, and our ships were being stolen, and American citizens were being captured and put into slavery, even back then. And they made it very clear that they were on that jihad against anyone that was not Islam. So it's repeated today. And we went to war in 1805 to fight those radical jihadists of the day. Many people don't know that. President Jefferson defended our soldiers and went to bring back those ships, and he brought those people back to safety. Now, the other ideologies that I think would be very counter to American exceptionalism would be any kind of ideology that is counter to our free enterprise system, anything that is going to be redistribution of our wealth. We have, of course, at the extreme, a Marxist ideology, and then the road to, which would be socialist, which is very much becoming the rule of the day amongst the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C. Many of them are outwardly calling themselves that right now. And then there's the mixed, which is also very dangerous, which would be the corporations that are heavily regulated and managed and controlled by the federal government, but are also allowed to still be private enterprise. But those are the ideologies that I think are most damaging to American exceptionalism. Separation of church and state means religious liberty in the public square or anywhere. That is a foundational principle. Our founders said that this government, that this Constitution would not stand without a moral religious foundation. It's profusely written in their writings. And today, there are those who would like to concoct a wall of separation. Even Thomas Jefferson did not have that view. He wrote very positively about how important religion was in our public life. So for me, it is that religious liberty. And for those who like to think it's religion, or excuse me, freedom from religion, they are entirely wrong. They need to go back and read the history and the context of which this nation was founded. What's happened to the Constitution? It's like your great-great-grandmother's old pioneer recipe. And each generation, somebody just changes it up a bit, and then when you get 3 or 4 generations down the line, it's not even the same recipe as it was originally. That's what's been happening to the Constitution. With regard to the General Welfare Clause, it has been created in its present interpretation out of thin air, because it was never our founders' intent to create a welfare state. And yet, the Welfare Clause has been used to do just that, to have free rein to do whatever it pleases, and it is breaking our economy and putting us in terrible debt. Now, as far as the Commerce Clause is concerned, the founders' view of regulating was not regulating private business and enterprise. It was making things regular so that commerce could go freely back and forth between the states. And through various decisions, court decisions from Butler on forward to Wickard v. Filburn, which decided, we could tell a farmer how much wheat he could store or not store, and because, they wanted to start regulating that market and subsidizing. Those things have been very damaging and very much out of line with what our founders originally intended.